What's up, Internet? It is that time of year once again. You know the time where I remember the things that I played this year and then give you a list of easily digestible information because people like that, and it might mean that my channel actually gets seen for once. That'd be nice. Either way, this is the top 10 games of 2023. If this is your first time here, hey, how you doing? But also, these are the games that I played this year that were the best of the best. Not necessarily games that came out this year, although there are a few, but really the cream of the crop. If I sat here and actually just stuck around with the games that only came here, well, I'd be stuck with just what came out this year, and that could be a little less than interesting. Also, if we start thinking about like AAA space, and oh god, that's a nightmare, and this would be a very sad list, I think. These are the best games I have played this year. These are the cream of the crop. Look forward to them, and I'm going to stall a little bit more because we do have to go into some honorable mentions, and the first one, unfortunately, there's a bit of a flashing light warning, so if you're photosensitive, I've got chapters up, skip ahead to the next one, or set this into audio only or something, because, yeah, this one might be a bit of an issue for you. I know I played it, and I got some headaches from it with my photosensitivity, so just heads up, okay? We good? Alright. So our first honorable mention is Sayonara Wild Hearts, not to be confused with another game that also has the term Wild Hearts in it. No, that'll be on the other list, I can assure you. Spoilers. Sayonara Wild Hearts could best be described as an arcade game, and I guess in a very loose interpretation, rhythm? It might be a rhythm game. I think if you called it a rhythm game, you'd be wrong to do so. It only uses one button, and it's got the most forgiving prompts ever, but, you know, it might be that as well. But more importantly, it is a musical pop opera in the form of a video game, all themed around surviving heartbreak. And it is an absolutely gorgeous game, both in its themes, its visuals, and its music. It's not a perfect game, it does have some issues. First of all, the aforementioned flashing you can't turn off in any capacity means that if you're photosensitive, this game is basically a no-go. But also, there are some issues with the music itself. Like, every boss fight is punctuated with a vocal track that is absolutely awesome, except for one that feels really out of place, including that boss fight. It's not that great, but after the boss fight, you start a new chapter, and it's like a transitory stage that is basically identical to every other transitory stage, and the music isn't all that remarkable. It's a real shame that these stages are as kind of bland and forgettable as they are, because when this game actually tries to give you an interesting chunk of chapter before the boss fights, and certainly with the boss fights, it is substantially more interesting. This game is awesome. The soundtrack is amazing. Like, again, if you have epilepsy or anything, just listen to the soundtrack. Shoutouts to Dead of Night, probably my favorite song on the soundtrack. Mine, for its kind of terrible message, is a very, very cute, upbeat track. And of course, Inside is just an absolutely beautiful song. And the final song of the game always leaves me in tears. And if nothing else, this is probably the single greatest game ever voice acted by Queen Latifah. It might also be the only one, but I digress. Moving on to honorable mention number B, Landstalker. I'm actually just making this decision right now. It was originally going to be number 9 on my list, but what I'm swapping it with I think fits a little better over there. So, yeah, Landstalker. This game is a Sega Genesis game. It will not be the last one of those on the list, but I also spent a lot of this year focusing on collecting for the Genesis system. It is a Shining Force adjacent game, and a lot of people who worked on Shining Force worked on this, which explains why it looks kind of like Shining Force, and I love Shining Force. But it is an isometric RPG adventure game, not dissimilar to something kind of like Solstice or, say, Equinox, if you want the Super Nintendo variant, I suppose. And it is just a great little adventure game. It's really hard to find and fairly expensive, as a lot of Genesis games tend to be this year, but honestly, I just love this one for its grand adventure, interesting world, and really interesting quests. But it does have the issue that every isometric game has, which is isometric controls are really hard to wrap your head around, and even when you think you've got it, sometimes you kind of forget or it doesn't translate well to your hands. Yeah, I kind of got lost and got the directions wrong, and combat became a little bit more difficult in this game, but it was a really fun game, and I mean, it was good enough to get several sequels in the form of the really poorly named Lady Stalker, as well as the Dark Savior games, which I should try at some point because this game was really quite that good. Seriously, Landstalker, one of the best Genesis games I played this year, definitely one worth looking out for sure. Alright, now that honorable mentions are out of the way, let's move on to the list proper with number 10. EDF 6. The EDF in time. Or something. I think? This is the newest iteration of the Earth Defense Force series, a series I love with an absolute passion, like all the way back to the Xbox 360 where we in North America first got it. It is just as budget cheese as it always has been, and I can instantly recommend it because it's just a fun, goofy, mindless, great time. It has a sort of Monster Hunter loop to it, although it's far more arcadey in the sense that you start a level, mow down hundreds of enemies, and then each enemy can drop weapons. You equip the weapons, and then you're better at mowing down monsters, so you better go test it out and get better weapons and better weapons and better weapons, until you have like a nuke rocket launcher that takes out the entire stage in one hit. This series is ridiculous and goofy and awesome, and I love it, but you'll notice that it's pretty far down the list, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, this year was just awesome for games, but second of all, this game doesn't feel as good as it possibly could be, and there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost is, of course, the fact that it's still in Japanese. This has not been ported to North America as far as I'm aware, and there might not be a chance for it to, which is sad because I have no idea what's going on. I think there's a time travel or a dimension hopping plot because there's other EDFs around, I think? But this game is pretty straightforward, so you don't really need that much of a translation going into it. It would, however, be really, really nice to see weapon statistics to know what I'm actually equipping myself with. That's a bit of a bigger issue. The other big issue about this being Japanese is that it is an import, which means I have to pay more money for it, and that leads me to my second big issue about EDF, which is that this started out as part of the Simple 2000 series on the PS2, not unlike the Oni-chan Bara, which is still going today. It was always a series about goofy budget fun, and it still is, except it hasn't brought the price point along with it. I mean, ignoring the fact that I had to import this and pay like an extra $30 for that, it was the price of a full game, but it still feels like a budget game, and to be fair, I don't think they could up the visuals and stuff like that. I mean, they kinda tried to do that with those weird North American EDF games that were terrible and missed the point entirely. At the same time, it feels like I'm paying a lot more for a game that does a lot less, and still looks like it belongs on the PS2, and that kinda sucks. That said, you do have awesome monsters to kill, aliens, you've got giant frogs you can remove their limbs from, and they'll try and regenerate and crawl around and make do with whatever limbs they have left. That's really fun. Giant spiders, lots of crazy weapons, 4 different playable characters, tons of unlockables, and really the only thing about this that bothers me that I haven't mentioned so far is, once again, we don't have full customization of our characters' outfits. That would be nice. And of course, and this is entirely personal preference, EDF 2025 on the Xbox 360 gave the wing divers laser pigtails. They were stupid, they were goofy, they were insane, and they made absolutely no sense, and I missed them. Bring back laser pigtails. They were awesome. But either way, EDF 6 should be on your must import list. This is definitely a fantastic game you can sink an absurd amount of time into if you're into this sort of game. And I mean, since the last 2 games we got in North America were awful and kind of designed specifically for North American audiences, yeah, this is probably the closest to an actual EDF fix you'll get, which is kind of depressing. Well, let's get away from depression and move on to number 9. I'm kind of cheating with number 9. See, I'm including 2 games specifically here, but there's a reason, and that is that they have sort of a blanket theme. Like I said, I've been collecting a whole bunch of Genesis games this year, and the Genesis gets a lot of flack. For one thing, it is often compared to the Super Nintendo, a thing that it wasn't designed to compete with. I said this back in Phantasy Star 2, but the Genesis wasn't designed to be the Super Nintendo's competition. It was designed to be the NES's competition. The fact that it went up against the Super Nintendo, and it did so with the tenacity it did, and it did so with the success that we still talk about it. That is what makes it so amazing. But people will always tell you, if you're gonna get a game on the Genesis or Super Nintendo, get the Super Nintendo version, because the Genesis version is always gonna be worse, if only for the soundtrack, which I respond, those people have never played Thunder Force 3 on the Super Nintendo, but I digress. Number 9 on my list is a little entry I'm gonna call The Genesis Did It Better. And here we have 2 games that, while they weren't released on both consoles, they did sort of have equivalents, and the fact is the Genesis just beats the ever-living crap out of the Super Nintendo version in my eyes. Those 2 games are both brought to you by Konami, back when their logo was 2 strips of bacon and what they made was worth something. We are, of course, talking about Castlevania Bloodlines and Contra Hard Corps. So let's start with Castlevania Bloodlines. Now, if I were to compare this to the Super Nintendo, we kind of have a bit of a problem, because I'd have to compare this against Dracula X. And, like, that's probably my favorite Castlevania, but wait! For the sake of making my point, I will point out that whenever I talk about Dracula X, someone is quick to pop up and mention, well, it's not Rondo! And because not being Rondo is apparently some kind of crime, it means that I can cherry pick and compare Bloodlines to Castlevania 4, which is a much less good game. I really need to get a copy of Rondo at some point. Either way, Super Castlevania 4 is a perfectly competent game, but it doesn't really do anything beyond that, and with the really wiggly whip and just overall difficulty of the game, I find it to be like the easiest and most boring of the Castlevania games. Like, I'm not good at these by any means or measure, but that one I just feel like is too easy by design, and I don't like it. It's a totally fine game, but it doesn't really do anything that engages me or makes me care about this. Not like Dracula X, but again, can't talk about that one, I guess. Conversely, Castlevania Bloodlines has 2 different playable characters that play completely differently, have different weapons, 6 levels, some crazy monsters, some really, really tough challenges, and oh yeah, a huge ocean of blood. This is an absolutely insane good time, and it pulls off some of the most impressive visual things I've seen on the Genesis. This one room in one of the last stages of the game, for example, is genuinely the thing that impressed me most on the Genesis, as far as I can remember. Like, seriously, they split the screen into like 5 bits and none of the areas correlate to one another in terms of spatial relationships. It is genuinely impressive, and if I could ever meet the person who programmed this, I would love to know how they did this, because this just fascinates me. On the other hand, Castlevania 4, it's fine, but Bloodlines just feels like it was going harder. Which brings us to Contra Hardcore. Fact is, Contra 3 The Alien Wars is a perfectly fine game, but it's entirely unremarkable as a Contra game. I mean, I don't think about it half as much as I think about Super C, and I don't think about Super C very much. The fact is, Contra 3 was a perfectly adequate game, and that was about as much as it would get for praise from me. But Contra Hardcore is just going so much harder, true to its name. 4 different playable characters, each with completely different sets of weapons and power-ups that all move and behave differently. They all have different hitboxes, so you can't run them all the same either. You've got splitting paths in the story that lead to different endings and different routes, different encounters. And oh yeah, they somehow managed to cram Mode 7 on the Genesis into this. Look, I'm not saying that Castlevania 4 is bad, although it's nothing compared to Dracula X. I'm not saying Contra 3 is a bad game, but to me, it just seems like Konami just had something it needed to prove on the Genesis. Like, it knew all these games were going to get compared to the Super Nintendo variants, and they wanted to make sure that these games were just going so much harder and so much more and so much better. These games are incredibly impressive, technically and gameplay-wise, and I think they just did it substantially better than the Super Nintendo. So next time you fire up that Super Nintendo, just remember, Genesis did do some things better. Number 8 on our list. I'm not gonna lie, I sunk about 80 hours into this game, and it was on lock for number 3 on this list. But it's so far down because of a lot of technical issues I ran into. This game is Baldur's Gate 3. It's funny, because Baldur's Gate 3, to me, had so much working against it. I tried playing a few of Larian's earlier games, the Divinity Original Sin games, and I didn't like them. Like at all. Like, I don't like top-down tabletop style games. To me, while it's designed to look like a vignette of the tabletop style, it makes the worlds feel so small and me as a player so removed from them, you know? I don't like that. And I have next to zero experience with Dungeons & Dragons. Primarily because I never had anyone to play with, but also because it seemed so arduous to try and understand and get yourself into. And yet this got me into D&D. You know, it made D&D actually kind of approachable, and it got me out of my shell a little bit. I mean, I don't play D&D with anyone. Again, I don't have anyone to play with, and I would be very, very awkward. I don't think I'd be good at it. But it did make me play a role I didn't think I'd actually enjoy. I started this up and figured, like every other RPG ever, I'd play some kind of rogue swordmaster kind of character. I ended up playing Monk and having an absolute blast, just doing 9 attacks on my opponents every single turn, just breaking things with my fist. It was an absolute ball of a time. The characters are absolutely brilliant. I mean, every time Astarion says something entirely morbid, I just laugh and fall a little bit more in love with them. Gale seems like the best mate ever, and I would just love to sit down and have a drink with him, although it might be a little awkward, what with me cutting off his hand that one time. And there's Karlach. Oh my god, I just want to give Karlach the biggest hug ever and never let go. I love her so much. The characters are so brilliantly written and acted, and they're so deep and interesting. Even if not every character appeals to me, like Halcyon is the biggest plank of wood ever, and if I recall, he even admits it. But the fact is, the characters, the writing, the world are so brilliant. You can get really deep into the role-playing and the character building and create some absurdly overpowered abilities. Like I said, I'm a monk that hits things like 9 times every single turn. I can empty entire battlefields on my own. It's kind of delightful, and I kind of love it, and I want to experience more of D&D from this, if I'm being entirely honest. But it has issues. Like I said, after 80 hours, this was on lock for being number 3 on my list, and yet it's here at number 8. The moment I got to chapter 2, well, I ran into so many glitches and bugs, and not the fun, sexy kind, the kind where your weapons are floating above your head instead of your hands, the kind where after you kill an enemy, they're standing above themselves, A-posing for some reason, the kind where if you pick up a book, your entire game crashes consistently. You know, I love this game so much that for fear of having to continue into chapter 2 and breaking the game in a way that would make it unplayable, I started chapter 1 again and again and again. I've got 5 files that have pretty much finished chapter 1 at this point, and I'm still having an absolute ball of it, and I want to continue to explore this game and see more of it, but I'm just scared of progressing to a point where it's not playable. And the funny thing is, most of the bugs I've run into don't seem to be like chapter based, so why they seem to exclusively happen after the first chapter, I don't know. That said, there are a few issues that happen outside of the first chapter. Basic AI pathfinding is frustrating at the best of times. Sometimes characters will just be on the opposite side of the world even though they're supposed to be following you in your party. If you ever need to jump anywhere to get around, it's pretty much guaranteed that at least 25% of your party just won't. So you have to manually go into the menu, separate them from your party, take control over them, manually jump again, then reform your party again, and then pick your protagonist. Like, it's such a small thing, and it's so frustrating and time-consuming and annoying. And I want to love this game more because this game is absolutely amazing. I love this world and its characters, and I mean, like I said, it makes me actually want to try D&D, provided I could find people that could put up with me. But I dread having to continue this game for fear that I might break it in some way that it becomes unplayable, or just the experience in general is unpleasant because of all the bugs. I wish this was more playable, and I wish that the bugs would stop, and apparently they get worse in Chapter 3. Either way, Baldur's Gate 3 is an utterly remarkable game, but it's just buggy, and it makes me sad that it's buggy because I absolutely adore this game and I want to play so much more. It's made me kind of love tabletop games, or at least tabletop style games. It's made me kind of love actual tabletop games, and it's gotten me into D&D, sorta. If you're interested in D&D but don't know where to start, this might be your in point. And yet, I can't give it a higher rating just because of how bad it gets sometimes with the bugs. It's a shame because I love you, Baldur's Gate 3, and I hope you get fixed so I can play a lot more of you, but the bugs, they knocked you down about 5 spots. Number 7 on our list is an RPG with a slightly smaller budget, and yet it's higher up on this list, so it is mathematically provably better than Baldur's Gate 3. That is 8-Bit Adventures 2. The developer sent me a copy of this earlier this year, and basically they just said, you know, here's a free game, you know, review it, that'd be nice if you could, but, you know, if you don't, whatever. And they asked me specifically if I was to review this, not show any late game stuff, which is totally fine. So I played up to that, had an absolute blast of a time playing this game. And when I got to sort of the late game stuff that I was told not to talk about because they don't want their game spoiled, you know, I stopped there because nothing past this point would be helpful towards, you know, telling you exactly what the experience is for the majority of the game without spoiling it. And this year there has been so much going on in my life. It's been so hectic, and it's only going more sideways as the days go by. And yet, in spite of all of the stuff that's been sort of rattling on in my head about how I have to deal with stuff in life right now, I haven't finished this game, and I've been thinking about it all year long because I played it, and because it was such a quality experience, and it was such an interesting game, that in spite of everything kind of having to take up my entire attention span over the course of this year, this has stuck with me. It's that special. This is, at first blush, a Me Too Final Fantasy I RPG Maker knockoff game, kind of, but it is so much more than that. Your characters may exist in this sort of fantasy pastoral world, but, and this is in the intro, it's not a spoiler, you know, they say that this pastoral fantasyland world is actually just a program in a computer, and all the characters are individual programs that are all governed by this computer, and this computer is under, effectively, a physical attack from within, and you as a program have to go out and stop it, both in the computer world, but also in your pastoral world, and you kind of have to make the two clash. And it's fascinating. The characters are ridiculously deep. Without spoiling too much, the villain of the game is a computer glitch, but he's just a kid told that he can't be alive because he's just by virtue of existing, going to ruin everything. And all he wants is just to live. And the fact is, this villain, he's not a good person, and he does bad things by virtue of what he is, but he is, in a sort of skewed sense, also sort of an innocent in all this. He is effectively just someone who didn't ask for this lot in life, and yet he has it thrust upon him, and he just wants to make the most of it to survive, so that he can exist in this world and just effectively be a kid living a life. All of the characters in this game have deep interpersonal relationships, and part of this is because, you know, half your party is carried over from a previous game that I really need to play at some point. But the other half is just character building and really well-written, deep, interesting characters. And this game gets so much out of effectively so little compared to other games. You know, it is effectively just an RPG Maker game, and yet they have proven absolutely nailing the fundamentals and having a good core idea makes an absolutely memorable and beautiful game. The soundtrack to this is absolutely fantastic, and I have got to pick it up at some point, but playing this again just for this footage, I'm absolutely engrossed with the music and the visuals. The sprite art is fantastic. There are a couple issues with it. I still think the combat GUI is a little too claustrophobic, but if you play this game for a little while, you kind of ignore it. And the game has a sense of urgency in its narratives that it kind of also ignores to give you backstory on the world in the previous game that I feel like kind of undercuts the sense of urgency it's trying to set up. But it is a beautiful, really well-made RPG Maker game, and I think that if you like classic style RPGs, this is one to look at, because not only does it nail the fundamentals of being a good classic fantasy, Final Fantasy style RPG, it subverts it and creates something far more memorable and far more interesting. This is just a masterclass in what you can do with the RPG Maker engine, and once again proves that you don't need a huge budget to make a good, interesting, well-written game. You just have to have passion and a talent for it, and have a message worth telling. And I think this game does it really well. Number 6 on our list, Gravity Circuit. This was a game I picked up literally a week ago, sat down in one night and played through to the end of the game, and like in one sitting, I was just enamored with this game. It was such a fun game. This is Mega Man, but harder, but still approachable by basically anyone. It's a lot harder than the classic Mega Man games, like I said, but it's nowhere near as hard as like the ROM hacks or Kaizo nonsense. Still very much approachable, but it's also more mechanically in depth. You don't have a gun, but instead you punch things to death, so there's a really deep combo system. You want some super moves? You get lots of super moves in this game, and each one requires you to spend various amounts of energy to utilize them, so you kind of have to employ strategy with this as well. You've got dashes, you've got slides, you've got running. You want a double jump? You get a double jump. You want a grappling hook? You can freaking be a robot spiders man in this game. It almost feels like a sequel to Mega Man Zero 2, you know, the best Zero game, except it's done more in the style of the original Mega Man games, and it's unbelievably good, and the soundtrack is absolutely killer. I can only think of 2 things in this game I dislike, and the first one is that the final boss is a bit much. I think I wasted an hour of my night just going up against him over and over again, because he's a bit ridiculous and he's a bit of a gauntlet fight, but, you know, it's final boss, fine, I guess. But also, I think this game is absolutely begging for a mode that lets you play as like the Robot Masters as the main character instead, you know? Like each and every single one of them is absolutely brilliant and interesting. The big standout one for me was the music themed one where all of our attacks were like visualizer patterns on the floor and lasers. It was like fighting an actual like concert. It was such a cool boss. The way the world is designed is brilliant. There's cool secrets everywhere. If you're an achievement hunter, there's a metric crap ton that remind me of like Mega Man 9 with how ridiculous some get. There is a lot of content in Gravity Circuit, along with a really cool plot, some absolutely killer jams, some amazing levels, and it's just a treat to maneuver and play this game. Seriously, if you love Mega Man like me, if you love awesome platformers, you owe it to yourself to play Gravity Circuit. This game is amazing. Man, I loved myself some Mega's Man. It is literally one of my favorite series of all time. It was the first game I ever rented. I immediately find myself attracted to any Mega Man style game out there, and this one is a masterclass of it. Let's move on to sort of an RPG, sort of not. We have Lunacid, not to be confused with Lunalia, that will be on the other list, or Lunistis, an awesome little platformer I played on stream a little while ago. Go watch that. Lunacid is a throwback to good old Kingsfield, or, you know, Proto Dark Souls in first person if you prefer, I suppose. This is a game where you play a disembodied hand that flails swords about killing all kinds of monsters, but more importantly, finds all kinds of crazy secrets in this world because every area in this game has like a dozen, and there's at least 1 or 2 super weapons in every area of this game. It is nuts with content. It seems like such a small, unassuming game, and then when you actually get into it, you realize it's actually pretty gargantuan in scope. This is an amazing little game that just came out of early access, and honestly, the worst part about the game is the last chapter that they added. There's some stuff on the final chunk of this game I'll kind of sort of indirectly talk about, but Lunacid is this cool first-person dungeon crawling RPG where you collect loot, kill monsters, level up, and figure out what's going on in this world and, you know, what your lot in it is. It is dark, and it is dreary, and it is mysterious. There's a moment very early on, it's basically like the hub world you first enter. It's just a giant ocean of blood with a giant monster wandering around that you can't kill. And like this giant other super boss that's hiding behind the corner that will absolutely wreck you if you go and pick a fight with it. And you are just left in this world trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what's going on and, you know, why you're here and how you're here, along with what cool weapons you can find, including the Moonlight Sword, which is pretty great. This game is absolutely mysterious, and there is so much going on with it, and I absolutely love it. The combat is perfectly fine. You've got magic spells, and quite a few of them. You have a ridiculous number of weapons, and you can upgrade them as well, although you have to grind enemies, and that's not very fun. And it's just fun to see all the secrets in this game, some of which are unbelievably obtuse to get as well. That said, as much as I do love this game, and it has engrossed me to get like 50 or so hours in before they even got it out of early access, it does have some problems. First and foremost is that last chapter that the early access period adds. Yeah, it adds a final boss that's completely dumb. Like, there was one boss in the game prior, and it was an absolute cakewalk, so they decided to go hard the other way, and it's basically an exercise in potion spam. That's not so great. But also, as much as I love the kind of obtuse puzzle solving and secrets in this game, there's one that absolutely made me angry and made me consider not putting this on my list at all. In order to get one of the endings, you have to collect a bunch of stuff. And one of the things you need only shows up 1 day a month. It's tied to the lunar calendar. There's actually a lot of things in the game that are kind of controlled by the lunar calendar, although the game doesn't tell you this. But the thing is, this one thing only shows up 1 day a month, and if you don't get it, you can't get the second ending this game has. And nowhere in the game does it ever tell you any of this, really. It's obtuse, and it's very confusing, and sure, you can go into your system settings and change it, but that's not how it was designed to be approached. You were supposed to actually wait and grab it when ready, and that's just dumb. I don't like that so much. There's one other big issue Lunacid has, and that is solely for playing on the Steam Deck. This game runs perfectly fine on the Steam Deck, except that 1 or 2 cinematics just don't play. You are met with a black screen and you just have to live with it. And 2 of those are involving secrets, which really sucks because that means you don't really get to explore the secrets. And the other is that second ending. I unlocked it and all I got was a black screen. I still don't know what the second ending actually is to this game, and you have to jump through quite a few hoops to get that, not just waiting one specific day a month. Yeah, I'm a little bit bitter about that, but Lunacid is, at its core, a brilliant first-person adventure with a really creepy, macabre atmosphere and a genuinely interesting, deep world where you can just get lost in it and explore it and find all the secrets and try and hypothesize what any of this stuff is. I remember getting stuck on so many puzzles in this game and then just 1 minute while I'm laying in bed think, wait a minute, if I do that, maybe that'll open. Is that how I opened the castle? And it was, and I felt so bloody brilliant when I came up with it. This is the Dark Souls for people who want to feel very, very smart or feel very, very stupid. Because when you solve those problems, you feel like an absolute galaxy brain genius. And when you don't, you feel like you're beating your head against a brick wall because you can't figure it out. But there's always rewards here. There's a deep, interesting, interconnected world. It has gone up in price since I bought it. It was like originally like $6, and you know, I got 50 hours out of that $6, so totally worth it. But man, there's very little for me to complain about this game, and pretty much all of it's on the back end and needs to be tweaked for the Steam Deck. But otherwise, Lunacid is an amazing first-person adventure game with deep, dank, dark dungeons to go explore and lots of cool loot to find and scary enemies to interact with. Genuinely, some actually terrifying moments in this game. Seriously, play this one. It's amazing. Or at least watch my gameplay video where I ran around at level 1, refusing to level up. That too works out well. But yeah, play this game. It's good. Number 4 is conveniently a game that has the number 4 in it. This is Phantasy Star 4. I might be a little bit gung-ho putting this in here on this list, especially this high, because the fact is, I've only played a few hours of it just to test my cartridge out. I'm actually currently working on a review of Phantasy Star 3, which is a big complex game, so before I get into this to review, I want to do 3, but I played a little bit of this, and it immediately struck me how much of, by leaps and bounds, a quality improvement this game was. Not only over previous Phantasy Star iterations, but more RPGs in general on the Genesis. I own almost every Genesis exclusive RPG at this point. I'm making a point of trying to get all of them, and this one seems like one of the highest quality, which would explain why it's had so much extra development time, and as I understand, extra like special chips and stuff, which is why it's such an expensive game. But I remember 10 years ago when I started kind of getting my Genesis stuff again, that this was kind of considered the holy grail of games for the system, and I totally see why. The characters are deeply written, far more interesting than Phantasy Star 2, which had some issues with everything aside from its presentation and general story, although it was very, very small. This just looks better, sounds better, and it feels like such a grand adventure compared to the previous ones, and it genuinely just stands out as being far more interesting and far more grand in scale and scope and in concept than any other RPG on the Genesis that I can think of. Sure, it doesn't have the whole generation-spanning idea that Phantasy Star 3 had, which is pretty ambitious, but at least from what I'm seeing thus far, that kind of didn't go as far as they probably could have pushed it, and that's probably a budget thing. The fact is, Phantasy Star 4, based on my experiences with the other Phantasy Star games on the Genesis, is easily the best out of the lot, and while it might not be as ambitious as the third one, I think this is probably the most polished. This feels like a very late Genesis game, and in general, one of the best, and I totally see why it's held in such high regard. I might be a little bit early putting this on the list, but based on the first couple hours I played, I was thoroughly impressed with this game, and I want to see where it goes, and I'm looking forward to review it once I actually finally finish 3. It might take a little while, but I'm working on it. Number 3 on our list is an interesting little trend I found this year. I see it every now and then, but this year I found 3 big games that followed this one trend, and that trend is always described by random people, usually in reviews or whatever, or in the media, that always says these exact words, that X game is like Chrono Trigger, but X. And the thing you have to understand is automatically comparing it to another game like that is really reductive in terms of describing things. I know I'm occasionally at fault of that as well. I try and avoid that because it's honestly very reductive in explaining what a game is. But the other big issue with this is that shit's sacred. You can't just throw the name Chrono Trigger out there and just expect that to fly with me. That is one of my favorite games of all time. God, I still need to get a Super Nintendo cartridge of that. But if you're gonna compare this to Chrono Trigger, you're immediately gonna have me in my head comparing it. And ain't nothing gonna beat Chrono Trigger because, well, first of all, nostalgia, but second of all, that's one of the best games I've ever played. That said, we had 3 games that had that description this year. The first one was Elerium Shift, which I can best describe using that trend as like Chrono Trigger, but still in early access, ergo it's unfinished, so it's not going on this list, maybe next year. The next one was Chained Echoes, which I could best describe as like Chrono Trigger, but also there's mechs, and also you can customize your entire character's build, and you have to unlock different classes, and it's a genuinely interesting world, and it's pretty good. And finally, we have Sea of Stars, best described as like Chrono Trigger, but with Paper Mario's active combat system thrown in an amazing world by the people who did The Messenger. Out of these 2 games, because we're not counting Elerium Shift, I'm gonna give the nod to Sea of Stars. Playing all 3 of them recently, I think this one has me a little bit more interested and invested in the world. It is genuinely quite a fascinating world to explore. I mean, the first island you go to has this giant snake that's capable of destroying the entire island, and it's just asleep, and there's lore reasons as to why, and they go over it, and it's a really deep, interesting world. It feels like you're on this huge tour of this world, seeing all these interesting things and set pieces that all have reasons for being there while you're all on this big, grand, epic quest. The combat is absolutely amazing in this. Like I said, pretty much all the attacks have an active component where you can do more damage or do an extra attack if you time it correctly, which makes combat feel satisfying, especially when you start really succeeding. Although I found the timing on defense to be a little bit tighter than I would like, but there's a full suite of different things you can equip to your save file effectively that modify the difficulty and give you extra effects. These artifacts completely change how you play and can even make it harder if that's your bag, but if you want to make it easier or have a completely customized experience, you unlock that along the way. That is fascinating. The characters in this world are amazing. I think my favorite out of all of them is this pirate Keenathan, who is the wind mage who creates the wind for the sails of the ship, but he can only do it if he wears an eye patch in both eyes to blind himself. Keenathan might be the best character in this game, but each of the characters is fascinating and interesting, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful world. Really high stakes, an interesting, absorbing lore. I love Sea of Stars. That said, let's also give a bit of a nod to Chained Echoes. This game was really quite cool. I have fond memories playing this game. I like that every area sort of had its own achievement system that would allow you to unlock new content for yourselves and make you stronger as you did these extra challenges. You could unlock different classes for all your characters by visiting all these shrines and using tokens that you've unlocked through the achievement system to give your characters each extra boosts. Every single level you could dump into customizable skill trees for each of your characters to build every character out uniquely. The lore to this world is interesting. The world itself is great, and I want to play more of this. That said, I don't quite like it as much as Sea of Stars. First and foremost, it's been a while, but the characters didn't leave as much of an impression on me. I think one of the characters was named Sienna, and I only remember her because she was a spicy redhead like me, and I kind of liked her. And there was a lizard guy with like robot pants. I liked him too, but honestly, the characters just didn't hit as much for me in this game, nor did it really feel as organic in its storytelling as Sea of Stars did. Both are absolutely beautiful games though, and you should play both. But if you're only going to get one game that other people say is like Chrono Trigger, but it's not, and it's nowhere near as good, get Sea of Stars, because it's pretty amazing on its own right. Number 2. Yo. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk! 20 years ago, there was an amazing game that was released. That game was Jet Set Radio. It got one awesome sequel that I don't think is as good as the first game, but I digress. Since then, we have not seen a brand new game from Sega, and I think that Jet Set Radio is probably the second biggest IP that has been completely abandoned by Sega, right next to Skies of Arcadia and above Panzer Dragoon. So you know what? The people who made Lethal League said, screw it, we'll make our own. So much more better than Sega could ever hope to, and damn if they didn't do it. This is an awesome skating game that isn't really a skating game. It's more of a platformer with racing lines inspired. You just happen to be on roller skates. And it's absolutely beautiful. Awesome cell shading, beautiful artwork, and a really fun racing lines to go and find. Tons of things to collect. It's not perfect. The game spends a great deal of time at the start over-explaining very basic things, while neglecting some things that really should be explained. Like that one graffiti spot in the first level that no one could figure out how to get to. You knock a turd up into the air and use it as a platform, by the way. But also, they don't tell you the differences between the 3 vehicles. That being that bikes can go in bike garages to unlock stuff. Skateboards can trick off of fire hydrants to get to secret places, of which there are 1 in the game. And that inline skates can break glass floors. But they each have slightly different abilities in regards to tricking and manualing as well, and the game explains absolutely none of it, and it probably should. The other big issue I have with this game, and it's a small thing and it's a personal taste thing, but other than your main character, pretty much all the playable characters in the story mode are like the blandest characters in this world of absolutely nut bar characters. Like, there are so many interesting characters, and aside from your main character, you get to play as none of them over the course of the story. You unlock them in post, but over the course of the story, you get the boring characters. And while you do get to collect other palettes for your characters to make them look a little bit more interesting, they're like the worst color combinations I think I've ever seen. I'm not saying I need to be able to completely customize the characters to colors I would like, although that would be nice, but give me a few more options or pick someone with a little more taste in your color combinations, please, because the ones you've got are not that good. That said, you are in an absolutely insane world as a skater throwing up tags left, right, and center to become the ultimate Rudy. You are actively trying to escape the police, who will go very, very violent at your little graffiti crimes, and you're trying to own all of New Amsterdam. This game has an interesting, surreal plot of weird stuff going on, some absolutely crazy characters, and some amazing areas to skate in. And you want to know how great this game is? After beating the story, I was just skating around, platforming and tricking off stuff because I was enjoying the movement so much. It was just fun to get from point A to point B in this game. Like, the mechanics were just that enjoyable. I didn't care that I had nothing else to do in the game, aside from some really ridiculous challenges I'll probably never complete. I was just happy being a part of this world and getting to enjoy it. And hell, they went to the effort of getting Hideki Naganuma, you know, the guy who did all the best songs from Jet Set Radio, to give this game a few songs, and he does the best songs in this game too! Hideki Naganuma's Get Enough is reason enough to buy Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, if nothing else. It is the best song I've heard this year, and it is in an absolutely crazy fun platforming, racing, sort of parkour disguised as a sports-ish skating thing, and it's just an absolute beautiful game that I want several sequels of right this instant, because seriously, this game is amazing. Give me more. Because Red's quest to find his roots and go all city, man, I could not get enough. I wanted to live it up. Rising Red to the top, and man, don't you ever stop. Make me more of these, because god damn it, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk might be one of the best games I have played in a very long time, just from concept alone. When someone told me, hey, new Jet Set Radio, I said, that's going to be on my Game of the Year list. Before I even played it, I knew it was going to be here, and I knew it was going to be high. And yeah, any other year this would have been number one. But alas, there is one game that tops it, and that is number one. Number one is a game that I played a little bit earlier this year. It was a game that, when I started playing it, and I even said this in the video, this was definitely my game of the year. Something big would have to topple it, and even Bomb Rush couldn't do it. If you know me, you know exactly what this game is going to be. You know how different and interesting and special this game is going to be. And what's this crap on screen? Yo, Tears of the Kingdom, you're looking for the other list? This is a good one. You're looking for the bad one. Go away now. That's, of course, Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass. This is an amazing RPG Maker project that seems to have gone under everyone's radar, and it's a damn shame. You could reductively call it something along the lines of Undertale, Omori, or Earthbound, in the sense that it is an RPG that is bright, it is colorful, it is comical, silly, goofy, and fun, but it's about so much more underneath all that, and that is very, very true. It is very much that, and not just the body horror, which is definitely a part of this game. This game is all over the place in terms of its tone. I've called it a cacophony of insanity before, and I stand by that. It is absolutely all over the place in terms of tone and what you do. You are in like this crazy surreal dream world with this kid, just going on this adventure with his family, finding the value of his connections and the world he's in, and trying to save this world from this invading entity. And you have so many interesting transformations to apply, going to all these different crazy worlds filled with different interesting creatures that have like their own societies, and the way they interact with them is so interesting. There's a kingdom entirely made of sentient instruments, and that actually kind of plays into the mechanics of the actual lore of the world. There's so much going on in this game, and the writing is so brilliant. These are awesome, multifaceted characters with deep interpersonal relationships and a lot of trauma, each and every one of them. And every character gets several dungeons where you can just explore who they are as a person. The writing is so brilliant. Like, let me give you an example, without going too much into detail. There was this door, you know, the thing you open to go into rooms? There was flavor text for that. The flavor text for that door made me burst out into tears. This game is so emotionally raw and pure, and it just hit me so viscerally. This is a very complicated game in terms of mechanics. There's so much going on. There's 1,000,001 secret bosses and hidden dungeons that you can probably one-shot all the bosses if you build yourself just right, because the main character is so flexible in his design. The soundtrack is absolutely beautiful. The visuals are absolutely memorable. This might be the game I've seen that has the most heart put in it in a very, very long time. Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass is absolutely beautiful. It is full of heart, and if I'm being completely honest with you, I think every person in the world should play this, just to be better people, because there's so much going on with this game and its story. There is one thing I don't like about Jimmy, and that is that it does not play super well with the Steam Deck. Like, the game itself works fine, but if you ever put this on the Steam Deck, the audio is super, super loud and staticky, and it doesn't work all that well in terms of audio, which kind of sucks. I wanted to stream this as a Halloween stream, and I couldn't do it. And it made me sad, because this game's amazing and I'd like more people to know about it. So yeah, it could run a little bit better on Steam Deck in regards to the audio, but you know, otherwise it's a pretty special game, and I think it deserves all the attention in the world. And while it might not be perfect in some regards, I think it is absolutely beautiful and an absolute must-have And when I played this start of this year, I knew without a doubt this was going to be my game of the year, because there was nothing that was going to come close to this single indie developed RPG maker game that has so much heart and so much content and so many things to do. This is a very human project, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I think everyone should play Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass. And that has been my Game of the Year list. I hope you enjoyed, because it's, I've been thinking about this a lot this year. Like, I always write up a list as I play games for good things that could be my Game of the Year, and it's just, it's been rattling around in my head all year, especially with everything else going on. It's been hectic, but this was very special to talk about. I played a lot of really good games this year. When I was writing this, I had one extra spot to fill, and I had 19 games to put in that one spot. So, yeah, I played quite a few good games this year. I hope you have too, and use the comments to let me know what you have played that you really, really enjoyed, and if there's anything on this list you want to see yourself playing, because honestly, each of these games is amazing and you should play it. And let me know what you've played so that, I know what to play in the future, because there's lots of games I don't know about that I would love to play. Especially like the weird indie nonsense that just no one ever talks about. Who talks about Jimmy other than myself? Everyone should, and yet they don't. And that's how you get people to know about stuff like this. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, check out more stuff on my channel. I try and do a lot of stuff. In the new year, I'm hoping to get gameplay footage and other stuff back up into the rotation. I've just got so much going on in my life right now. It's very kind of scary and hectic, but we'll see what we can do. You might also want to check out my Twitch stream. I try and stream every single week, several times a week. Mondays, I tend to do Mega Man stuff, so that's a lot of fun. I kind of do weird indie stuff or Genesis stuff on Wednesdays or Thursdays, depending on how my schedule shakes out. Xenoblade Fridays, and hoping to get back into multi-card stuff on Sunday, but we will see. And if you really want to make my day, check out the show's PayPal, Patreon, and new Ko-fi, however I'm supposed to pronounce that, and support me any way you can so that I can continue to do awesome stuff like make cool lists. I do have some ideas that I've been thinking about getting into doing more lists, because I know people like them and they are fun to make, but we'll see. And, I appreciate anyone helping out. It gets you on the Discord, and it really helps me out in a kind of very scary personal time for me right now. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you'll check out the next list I do and see you around on this channel in the future. But if this is the first, last, or only time I see you, I hope you have a wonderful day, and peace out.